So overnight we think at about 3 a.m. local time there were two explosions, which have rocked the Kerch Bridge, which is the bridge linking mainland Russia to the occupied Crimean Peninsula across the Kerch Strait, which links the Black Sea to the Sea of Azov, so it's an absolutely vital strategic road link for Russia between mainland Russia and its occupied Crimean territory, and of course, it's a road and a rail bridge allowing them to bring in both tourists for Crimea for the summer tourism season, but also more importantly in terms of the conflict in Ukraine, military supplies and material to keep their forces, particularly on the southern front, armed and equipped. Now this is the second time that this bridge has been attacked in the course of the war since Vladimir Putin invaded in February 2022. The last time was in October when there was a massive explosion, what appeared to be possibly a truck bomb, although the exact cause has never been fully ascertained. In October, that blast damaged part of the road's carriageway, and it also sets a train on the adjacent railway line on fire, and it was for months, I think, until the bridge was fully operational again, although the Russians did manage to get it open in some form pretty quickly. This attack seems different now. The reports so far that it may have been conducted by maritime marine drones, that some sort of autonomous explosive device was steered into position under the bridge and has exploded from underneath, damaging both sections in both directions of the road bridge. Now that it's a 4-lane bridge, 2 lanes in each direction, which are also separate carriageways but supported on the same substructure. Footage from the scene does appear to suggest that there's been an explosion from underneath, because looking at the foot, as you can see that there's damage to the structure below the road. Vladimir Putin himself opened the bridge, and it was built at huge expense, essentially to cement his claim to Crimea. Now I'm sure our readers and viewers will remember that in 2014 Russia effectively annexed Crimea, that their little green men, as they were called, went in staged to kind of what they wanted to look like a spontaneous uprising, but as we know was clearly orchestrated by the Kremlin in Moscow. And then they held the sham referenda to cement their control, to basically say that Crimea was now part of Russia. Now once that process had happened, Vladimir Putin, all of the construction of this enormous bridge, a sort of engine, a significant feat of engineering, and which he opened, great fanfare. And it's symbolic because it, as I said, it links mainland Russia to occupy Crimea, is effectively a way of tethering one territory to another, and therefore any attempt to sever that tether is as symbolic as well as having strategic effects symbolically, cutting that tie to Russia. And of course, it's a huge morale boost for the Ukrainians, because throughout this war, what we've seen is Ukraine's armed forces focus their efforts on cutting and crippling Russia's supply lines to make it harder, if not impossible, for Russia to supply its forces on the front with food, men, and crucially with ammunition. Now what we saw last year was that after a nutritional summer where both sides were slogging it out with heavy artillery barrages, Ukraine managed to choke the supply lines, particularly in southern Ukraine, particularly to Russian forces who are occupying a Kherson city and the surrounding countryside. There came a point when the Russian commanders realized they could no longer hold that territory, because they could no longer supply their forces. Now what we're seeing again here is a similar attempt to choke Russian supply lines. We know that one of the key objectives of Ukraine's counteroffensive, which is currently ongoing, is to try and push its forces southwards so that they can get within artillery and rocket range of the Sea of Azov. Now it's often referred to as a land bridge. There is a strip of land that links mainland Russia to Crimea across the top of the Sea of Azov, and there are roads in that territory but particularly one or two main roads which Russia is using to also to supply its troops, and if Ukraine could get within artillery range of those roads they can effectively cut that supply line. But in order for any cut of supply lines to be effective, you have to cut all of them or as many of them as you can at the same time. Here we've seen the Kerch Bridge, the suspension bridge to Crimea, being cut. We know that Ukraine's forces are also trying to cut the routes across land, across the Sea of Azov. If they can achieve both of those objectives, then Crimea itself will become incredibly vulnerable. The timing is also important. This is the summer holiday season. Crimea is a summer holiday resort destination. Thousands of Russian tourists traditionally go there for their summer holidays on the Black Sea. What we saw last year when the bridge was cut was panic among those tourists who are desperately trying to flee because they thought they might have become trapped in a war zone. Now that they tourists or in Crimea cannot get out via the Kerch Bridge, their only option is to go by ferry or to go through occupied southern Ukraine.